Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And we have a very special bonus episode for you this week. I'm so excited to get into this episode. James and I had an opportunity to watch Denis Villeneuve's Dune adaptation of the fantastic novel by Frank Herbert. And we wanted to bring an episode to you on that. Of course we did. If you've listened to the show before, you'll know that we have been wanting to talk about this. I've been wanting to talk about this for years. But the two of us have been wanting to talk about this specific adaptation for well over a year now. James, how are you feeling?
Oh, I'm excited to get into this one, Matt, because like you said, there's been so much build-up. I mean, I think even in the first episode of the podcast we recorded, you brought up Dune, and it's been like a continuous thing. You've always, like, for as long as I've known you, you've been the biggest Dune superfan I've ever met. So to get the chance to watch the film like with you and to now chat about the film with you, I'm very excited. I think this is going to be a great episode. I'm looking forward to it.
So this episode, we're going to be talking all about Dune, but this is a spoiler-free episode about Dune. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, or if you haven't read the book, that's absolutely fine. We are going to be very careful about what we say and not reveal too many details about the plot. We'll be putting out another episode as well, which does contain spoilers. That's going to be over on our Patreon feed. So if you're interested in that and would like to hear that after you've seen the movie, head on over to patreon.com/journeythroughsci-fi to hear that.
And without further ado, here is our episode on Dune.
My planet Arrakis is so beautiful when the sun is low. Rolling over the sands, you can see spice in the air. The outsiders ravage our lands in front of our eyes. Their cruelty to my people is all I've known. What's to become of our world?
Okay then, Matt, to kick things off, I think you should tell the listeners a little bit about your experience with Dune and the book by Frank Herbert from 1965. So tell us a little bit about like your experiences with Dune growing up, how you feel about it, and we'll start with that.
So, well, I came to Dune very late, James. I read Dune probably about 10 years ago in my 20s, and I can't even remember why, to be honest with you. It was just recommended to me it had been recommended by lots of friends and people whose opinions on sci-fi I really respected. My dad was a fan of the book. So it had been in the back of my mind for a while, but I hadn't seen David Lynch's Dune, the TV series, anything like that, until after I picked up the book. So I read that, absolutely loved it, just blew me away. It's a really hard book to get into, but it's rewarding and a hell of an experience if you stick with it and really get yourself into the world of it. You've read it as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I've read it. I read it based on your recommendation because I'd seen the TV series adaptation on Sci-Fi. I'd seen the David Lynch version. So I had like an idea about the story, but I think when you actually read the book, there's so much in it. It's incredibly dense for what it is. But I know you always go on about the different themes and things in the book itself. Like there's a long list you usually reel off whenever we talk about Dune with any of our friends. So what would you say sort of like the key themes are? And I know this is going to be a fair few in there, but what sort of like things are in the book that people should expect going into the film?
Yeah, so it's no spoiler to say that the book is about ecology, religion, prophecy, politics and scheming, and well, those are the main things, aren't they? I think, in my opinion, you've got a main character who, with the best will in the world, is not much of a character. He just kind of has the events of the narrative thrown at him, but that is kind of the point of the book as well, that he's in the center of this story that's kind of happening around him and to him. And we've got Timothée Chalamet in that role. That's Paul, our main character. He's picking up that role in this new adaptation. What themes am I missing here? A big theme is sand.
Such a theme. It's such a center part of the entire film and book series is the sand, and sort of like you said, the ecology of it, and sort of the wasteland that is Arrakis, this planet which these characters are put on, and the importance of this planet. And again, there's so much to it. There's all this political intrigue, and like there's environmentalism in there, and there's different dynamics between genders and things like that in there as well. It's just so packed full of all of this stuff. And of course, religion's a really big factor in this as well, because I know Frank Herbert, when he wrote the book, was packing all of this stuff in there, but he was really interested in sort of how sort of like religious mythology and stuff came from a lot of countries which are sort of like desert environments and things like that, and sort of the historical significance of those countries, and sort of all of those things which are mixed in there into this science fiction story.
I think Herbert had spent some time in the Middle East, and quite a lot of the fictional language in Dune is adapted from Arabic and related languages that he gained a little bit of familiarity with. I'm not sure the extent of his familiarity, but there's certain terms that come out in the book that I'm even hesitant to talk about what those terms are and what they mean because of spoilers, but they're drawn from Middle Eastern languages like Arabic. Yeah, so he was very knowledgeable about all of that stuff when he came to write Dune, and you really feel that when you're reading it, that there is this isn't just some guy who plucked a story out of his head. There's half a lifetime of experience that's affecting his drive to tell this story. So yeah, you were touching on the religious stuff, the messianic themes. That's a big thing about it. And what's interesting is that the book was written in 1965, and I really felt this watching the new film. Just the way it's clearly influenced a lot of popular fiction since then about the hero's journey, that kind of thing. Frank Herbert didn't invent all of that stuff, but the way it works out in Dune is a huge influence to not just sci-fi, I would say, but definitely a great deal of sci-fi that's gone in the 50 years since then or more.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this, like, I read on the Wikipedia site for Dune that apparently Frank Herbert it suggested that Herbert wrote this as a kind of like a counterpoint to Asimov's Foundation series, which obviously has just been released on Apple. So I'm interested to sort of take a look at that series as well and see how these two sci-fi shows and films match up, because from what I gather, the Foundation is about the decay of a galactic empire and sort of has all of those themes running through it. And you've got that kind of stuff in here, haven't you? And I'd be interested to see how those two compare and contrast, because sticking with Dune, there's so much to it, like we've said. I mean, it's so expansive. People have been trying to adapt Dune into a full-length film for ages and ages, haven't they? So we've talked about previously on the podcast, I believe, some of the sort of adaptations which almost happened and things like that. But like Jodorowsky's Dune, for instance, 1974, that was sort of like supposed to be a massive one. And he wanted to do like a 10-hour long feature of Dune. So knowing that going into this film, that it could have been a crazy 10-hour version in 1975, it just goes to show how much is in there, how much is in that original story.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I need to see Jodorowsky's Dune. I do think, it would have never been 10 hours, right? Maybe the documentary reveals more about that, but lots of directors always want to make a very long film and always have, and those films never see the light of day in their 10-hour format, do they? Francis Ford Coppola gets edited down. Everyone gets edited down. But having said that, coming out of Dune the other day, my immediate reaction was that I immediately wanted 2.5 more hours of it. So
I'm not surprised you would say that, Matt.
Yeah. So 5 hours. If Denis Villeneuve gets another film, and if it's roughly the same runtime, 5 hours I think is going to be a perfect length for telling this story.
Yeah, that would make sense to me as well. And I mean, Jodorowsky's never came to light, did it? He didn't actually finally make that film. And when you said Jodorowsky's Dune, there's like a film about it. That's a documentary, isn't it? Which I think we're both very intrigued to see, because there was a great amount of really big names collaborating with him on that. He had Orson Welles, Salvador Dali, Dan O'Bannon, Gloria Swanson. There's all of these people which were involved in that.
His vision was so huge, so beyond what anybody else was doing at that time. Things that George Lucas wasn't even going to try with Star Wars. It's enormous.
Part of Holler's genius was finding the right people.
David Carradine, Mick Jagger, Dali as the Mad Emperor of the Galaxy.
Dali said, can I have a burning giraffe? All right, we'll have burning giraffe.
Orson Welles. Yeah, I say, I don't want to do it. I say, if you do the picture, I will hire the chef of the restaurant and you will eat as here every day. And I say, I do it. Giger nunca había hecho películas. I say to Giger, I need you as you are.
Alejandro completely motivated you. It was wonderful.
We will change the world.
People did not do this film because they were afraid of his imagination.
This is a movie that has its fingerprints all over so many other movies. Blade Runner, William Gibson, Matrix.
Giger, he make the monster of Alien. And Hollywood start to use my group.
It always leads back to Jodorowsky.
Could be fantastic, no?
With this new version that Denis has put together, he's got a stellar cast. And I mean, we'll go into the cast more in depth as we continue our chat, but it needs that kind of it needs those heavyweight credentials to bring this pivotal science fiction story to screen, doesn't it? Even in previous adaptations, what were the other adaptations that have been previously of this?
So the kind of main one, the best well-known one, is David Lynch's 1984 version, which you said you saw that before you read the book, right?
Yeah, I saw it a long time ago. My stepdad had it on a VHS. And just seeing the cover and seeing all the images of the sand and the sandworms and the people with the blue eyes, I instantly wanted to watch it. I was like, this looks great.
Yeah, there's a lot of good in that, but it's not. It's certainly not my favourite adaptation of the book. Having only seen it after reading and loving the book, I didn't have a great time with that. There's also you mentioned the Sci-Fi Channel TV series that came out in the early 2000s. That I thought was actually really, really good. It looks quite cheap, but I think that they do a really admirable job of building quite nice sets on what is obviously a very small budget and telling quite a faithful adaptation of the book. And then they did a sequel that was Children of Dune, which is the third book, and I can't quite remember how they slot the second book, whether it's in the first series or the second series, but they adapt those first three books on Sci-Fi, and that's decent. That is worth a watch, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember really enjoying that when I first watched it, and it made me more intrigued by the Dune universe, and I wanted to find out more about it. But again, it's taken me this long to really go back to the book and be okay, so I need to sort of understand this a bit more. And I pretty much back-to-backed Dune and Dune Messiah, because Dune Messiah is a much smaller book to read, but I was just so sort of invested in this world that I had to sort of read more and find out more about what's going on. So coming at this film from a die-hard fan's perspective, you are obviously Dune's biggest fan. You've got the board game you were telling me the other day. That's how extreme it is.
Oh, the board game is so good. It's so complicated and confusing and difficult to play, which is so appropriate for a Dune game. But it was a lot of fun. I played it the other weekend with some friends. When you actually spend the time to get into it, it's rewarding, like the book itself. I mean, I should say I'm not the biggest fan. I've only read the first 3 of the 6 original books that Frank Herbert wrote, because, to be completely honest with you, things kind of spiral into a really mad story in the 3rd book, and I just kind of lost interest in what was going on. Although I've heard that the 4th book in particular really picks things back up and is really good. And I certainly haven't read any of the prequels and stuff that his son's written. He's now written, many, many more books than Frank Herbert ever wrote in the Dune universe. Some of them really, really panned, and then I think some of the late ones are quite well reviewed and now quite well liked. But yeah, with all of that in mind, I do have a great love of the first book and the universe itself. And going in, I was very, very excited. I think mainly I was like just excited to be seeing a Dune film. Like I'd really, well, you were there, you were with me. We watched it together. I was giddy, you know. I was like really, really excited about it.
Like even going in to the screening, there was like, because we went to a press screening for it, there was like a screen card that they had. Yeah. And then we were even just getting excited seeing that. And then you were talking about, are they playing the music in the background?
Yeah.
And it was all of this excitement. I could see it in your face, just how excited you were to watch it.
Yeah, I was really, really worked up. But like the thing is, I guess my point is like, I like Denis Villeneuve, but I had only seen Arrival before this, which I loved. I thought it was amazing. But it wasn't like, I wasn't like totally convinced it was definitely going to be good. I'd really psyched myself up just for seeing a Dune film. It wasn't that I was actually confident it was going to be good. So I'd really set myself up for failure. You know, I could only be disappointed, you know. Yeah. But it didn't disappoint at all. As soon as it started, I felt like I was in the world that I imagined when I was reading the book, which is an incredible thing. Like it wasn't, you know, spot on exactly how I pictured it, but to even get as close to just the imagination of reading it is a really incredible thing to do.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to do as well. I mean, Villeneuve's, like, the scale of the film, I think, is so important because I don't think there's been a sci-fi film, at least with this kind of scale, for a long time, other than like your Star Wars and your MCU. There's not been a different kind of franchise with this kind of scale. And it's like, it's a blockbuster as well. Everything is massive in this. You've got ships which take up so much space on screen and just in the world that you're seeing. And they're rising out of the oceans and things like that and flying across the stars. But they're massive. Everything is massive about this film. And I think that's the thing that I couldn't get over. Like, it's just so vast and it's impressive to watch, isn't it? This sort of like this world that Villeneuve's put together. So like the world building to start off with, let's talk a little bit about that. So you like, I don't think it's a spoiler. There's a couple of planets which it's really centered on. There's one where the main group of people, the Atreides, live on the planet Caladan. And then you've got the planet Arrakis where they're sort of eventually going to go. So they're very contrasting, aren't they? And so what did you think about that first off and how Villeneuve put that all together?
It's very interestingly done in this film because my recollection of the book, and this might be a little bit wrong, but it is a long book and remembering it feels like not a lot of time is spent on Caladan in the book. That might be wrong. It might be more than I remember, but like in the context of the whole book, it is a relatively small amount of time. There's a lot more Caladan at the start of this film than I was expecting. But I think that works in terms of the pacing of this film. It's not a spoiler to say that this is part 1 of 2, and it adapts not all of the story of the first book. That's in the public sphere. That's well known, I think. So it's okay to say that. And when you take that into account, pacing it as he does, making this film, there's a lot more time spent on Caladan, and it works for that balance of building up the suspense of, you know, what Dune is going to be like, what the planet Arrakis is actually going to be like, and when are we going to get there, and what's going to happen when we get there. That works really well by having quite a bit more Caladan than you might expect as a fan of the book.
Going into Arrakis, which is a desert planet, it's where the name of the book and the film comes from. It's dunes, the sand dunes everywhere. There's dangerous sandworms, which I'm sure we'll touch upon later. It immediately contrasts with Caladan, and Caladan is kind of like this lush, green, watery world, and it's kind of like they've really sort of given it a kind of culture which is basically Scottish, right? They've kind of like made it like Scotland, and then Arrakis has all of these Middle Eastern cultures associated with it as a desert planet. So it's quite interesting, sort of like how Villeneuve's like stylized it in that way. And I think it's important for the journey of the film, because you start off in this sort of like this cold, wet place, but it's also quite like luscious at the same time. Like there's scenes when they're walking along sort of grassy plains, and then all of that completely changes, and there's a real sense of danger with them going to Arrakis, which is this desert planet, and everyone's talking about how dangerous it's going to be for their family to go over there, but they're having to go because of like legal, political reasons. So I've really loved all of that and how they really brought that to life.
Yeah, that contrast of those environments and the landscapes. And there's a few others as well. These are the two main planets that we see, but there are scenes set on a few other planets within the universe. And they all have their own distinctive look that's very important in the same way that you just said about the kind of the Scottish, British coastal kind of feel of Caladan compared to the harsher desert of Arrakis. There's similar things being done on the other planets as well. Even when it's a scene where we only get a very short amount of time there, it's got a very unique visual character that tells you quite a lot about what's going on with the characters that live on that planet. It's quite simplistic in that way, isn't it? Like, it has a lot in common with Game of Thrones. I think Game of Thrones' Song of Ice and Fire is heavily influenced by Dune, or Dune is influenced by the historical familial houses rivalry of the medieval times that also influenced George R. Martin. But within that, what it allows you to do is create like an immediate stereotype for one family. So it calls on what you might think about ancient Highlanders in the Scottish Highlands. They're noble warrior types. That's all you need to know when you see that kind of landscape. And then the same sort of trick is used on the other planets. Whatever the weather might be or the architecture of that planet, you immediately know a little bit about this clan, this house, this family that lives here and rules this planet. So you get this very quick sense, like Game of Thrones. The guys that live on the Iron Islands, and it's always just like pouring with rain there, and it's really hard, and they're really tough, mean guys. You got the swamp people, you've got House Stark up in the north in the snow, they're very hardy. It's exactly the same sort of trick, but done on planets, and also done for the economy of getting it done within one film. It's really important to tell you all of that really quickly as a viewer, so you've got a sense of who might live here and how they might act.
Yeah, and like the hierarchy sort of like feeds into that as well, doesn't it? Because like we said, there's lots of political tensions going on, just like Game of Thrones. It's got that similar kind of feel to it. And everything is very measured, and people say things without saying things. There's all of this kind of stuff happening in it. But there's also a real focus on finance and economy and what's driving the economy for these people. And even when they do like space travel scenes, they talk about the cost of traveling from one planet to another. They don't talk about it in like sort of like Star Wars terms where what do they say about the Millennium Falcon? They do the Kessler run in whatever minutes. They don't talk about it like that. They say, okay, this costs like X amount of money to get here. So they're very sort of finance based, and the main export, which is such a center point for the film, is this stuff called spice, and that becomes so pivotal to what's going on, and everything is just so sort of like it's money, political, and all of these things are sort of fed in to the main themes and the big set pieces, and everything is fed by that initial sort of concept.
Yeah, you mentioned world building earlier and how good the world building is in Dune, the novel, but specifically in this film adaptation of Dune. That in particular is a great example of it, because you're right, the economy of the Dune universe is incredibly important. It's a massive theme. On top of the politics goes hand in hand with how the money's moving around the universe. And referencing that is really important as just a almost throwaway line of dialogue. But you're right, compare it to doing the Kessler run in 12 parsecs. It's all about like how good is the ship, the Millennium Falcon, which is, wholly appropriate for Star Wars. But the world building that's happening here is very quickly telling the audience that money is important. And we're going to learn through the course of the film that spice is an important part of that economy. You know, it's not the currency per se, but it's vital to the strength of the currency. So you need to know that, like, these massive movements of ships from planet to planet, which is the whole, you know, how can you have this intergalactic empire without that happening? But you need to know there's a financial cost, and people think about it and people talk about it, and that's important. Maybe it's going to be more important later, maybe not, but it's one of those world building things that is kind of just slipped in there to let you know a little bit about the culture of everyone, really. You know, you've got the planetary cultures that we've seen visually, but this is an interplanetary economy that they're sharing.
And there's something very sort of dark about those themes and those topics as well, because it's a very sort of, it's a serious film. It's got elements of comedy in there and a few little bits, but everything's quite serious. This is like a dark science fiction. There's a sense of foreboding about a lot of the scenes. You don't know what's going to happen. You feel like something bad is just on the horizon. So in that way, it's very different from your other big sort of like sci-fi franchises, like your Star Wars or your Star Trek or things like that. Obviously, it's sort of like on that grand scale, but it's very like set in a realistic way. And there's something very sort of refreshing about seeing that in this film as well. Like, everything is just, it's you can picture it and you can see it as like a real society, can't you?
Yeah, the scripting is very good, and the dialogue is surprisingly good, in the sense of staying faithful to how people talk in the book, and also staying faithful to how human beings talk in 2021, you know? Like that took me a bit by surprise. I have to say, I avoided the trailer for a long time, because I just didn't want to know anything before I saw it. But we forgot to mention earlier, this film got shelved for a year. It's supposed to be out last Christmas. And, you know, somewhere along the line, I did end up watching the trailer. And I have to say, I really cringed at some of those moments of comedy that you mentioned. Duncan Idaho, Jason Momoa cracks a few quips. Oscar Isaac gets a bit of a gag line as well when they're all lined up to receive the Emperor's herald. But that made me quite nervous about what the dialogue was going to be like, to be honest. But there really isn't too much of that. To be honest, there's not a great deal more than was in the trailer. Duncan Idaho gets all the kind of quippy lines, and it's appropriate for his character. It's Jason Momoa. He's a big hunk. He's a tough guy. He's kind of the action hero. He's kind of the only action hero we want to guess. Josh Brolin, arguably, is a bit of a tough guy, but Jason Momoa is a good deal younger and more handsome than him. No disrespect, Josh Brolin's very handsome.
Josh Brolin's going to write in and be like, "What are you saying? I'm just as hunky as Jason Momoa."
He's like Jason Momoa's hunky dad.
Yes.
But like
grizzled and chiseled.
But anyway, like, point being, it's appropriate for Jason Momoa. It feels appropriate for Jason Momoa to be saying those lines, and it's not like seeing Aquaman on screen interrupting these moments with those god-awful Joss Whedon lines from the re-edited
Justice League. Yeah,
film.
Of course.
Yeah. So I was really happy with that. I thought all the dialogue was just, you know, a perfect balance of updating the language to be modern, but also staying faithful to the complexity of how people talk in the world of Dune. Because they talk in a very strange way in the book. It's very stilted and very odd. And every line of dialogue has a secondary or tertiary meaning behind it. So language is, I guess that's another theme as well, the way language is kind of wrapped up in lies and deciphering the truth behind it all. What did you think of the sign language they used to talk to each other?
I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it, because obviously when you read the book, there's so much that goes unsaid verbally. So they've got this extra way of talking, which is sign language, and they've got there's secret hand signs that they do occasionally, and it's very subtle, but it kind of adds this extra element to it where it's like there's so much about people trying to trick people, as you say, and this is sort of like a way of finding out the truth on certain occasions and things like that, and sort of showing your cards without showing your cards. So it's got all of that kind of stuff to it. But I think also I was very worried sort of about the exposition that would be involved in this film, because obviously, like we've said, it's so dense, there's so much going on, and there's so much going on in the characters' heads as well, because I think that's what I had when I read the book. There's a lot of sort of internal monologues and thinking and what people are going through, and the cast are having to depict this just through their acting, and it's not always said how they're feeling. So a lot of that is very dependent on the way that Villeneuve is telling his story visually. And I was worried as well for people which didn't have that kind of in-depth knowledge about the book and the sort of like the story beforehand. And I've spoken to a few people since who had no idea about sort of where it was going to go. And they said, when you first watch this film, it does seem a bit sort of off-putting and like but it's so intriguing as to what's going on. You're smack bang in the middle of this political intrigue. You don't really know who these people are, what these houses are doing, what these planets are, and you're kind of like learning as you go. And it's like any good script or film. You're smack bang in the middle of the action, something's about to happen, and you're having to sort of get all of this prior knowledge as you go. So I think, again, these hand signs and this sort of like sign language stuff is kind of feeding all into that as well. It's like the extra bits of information that you're going to get bit by bit, but it's not going to be sort of in your face exposition a la Christopher Nolan per se.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly worried about that before the film, like you were, but when the film first started, there's some heavy narrated exposition or dialogue that's just there for exposition that kind of I found a bit jarring, and I was a little bit like, oh no, is it going to be like this the whole way through, just explaining everything? But that they don't do too much of that. It's fine. And that, I think, is actually probably really useful for people who haven't read the book to get some of that explanation up front. I think that's probably why the book has been so hard to adapt and has caused directors trouble. Yeah, it's all those kind of internal conversations. There's lots of scenes in the book where characters will be speaking out loud, but then it's explained that none of the stuff they said was true, and actually just through the winks and nods and just stuff they already know, they know that the opposite is true, and they just said that as a diversion and stuff like that. That it's just incredibly hard to put that on screen and have it make any kind of sense, that everyone's just lying all the time or whatever, and then everyone just secretly understands the lies and decodes it in their heads. And all the characters are kind of like everyone's trying to be like 2 steps ahead of everyone else. So everything they say to each other is just in service of their own plan to be ahead of everyone else. So you might think you really know what they think and what they meant in what they said, but they meant something completely different, and then that'll get revealed. You know, all of that. It's incredibly dense and hard to put. It must be very hard to put on screen in a way that makes any kind of sense. So yeah, the sign language and the exposition and the narration and stuff like that is handled very well for people who haven't read the book, I think. Although it's very hard for me to say that because I've read the book.
I think there is still quite a lot that you don't find out about directly. Like, there are characters which you don't see in this first film, which are mentioned, and I think unless you know certain bits about what's going to happen, you kind of might get confused. I mean, I know a few people which there's a character who is a baron of House Harkonnen, and then there's also an emperor. And I spoke to a few people afterwards, and they were kind of confused between those 2 roles. They weren't quite sure. But again, because it's going at such a pace, this film has a lot to get through. It's trying, but it doesn't feel it doesn't feel like stressed or stretched as it's going. It feels like it's going at its own pace, and it's telling the story as it should be told. But I think in doing that, there are still bits which you will find out later. There's stuff going on that you might not get when you first watch this. You might be a bit confused by certain things that you're seeing. There's like dream sequences in it and things like that. There's a lot which, like we said, that goes unsaid, but is sort of leading to other stuff. But again, it's all sort of like you can get into this film. You are still captivated by this film, whether you understand all the intricacies of the political stuff that's going on. You are like, it's just awe-inspiring to watch. I've got to say, like the visuals, everything is just like, I was captivated by it. I wasn't looking at my watch. It's a 2 hour and a half film, but you're in it for the whole thing.
I was looking at my watch towards the end, but not because I was bored. I was absolutely loving it, but I was feeling a bit like, I think we're getting towards the ending. This feels like, in terms of how you pace a film, this feels like we're building to a climactic scene, but I had no idea where the film was going to stop relative to the plot of the book. I just knew that this was not a complete adaptation of the entire book. So I didn't know where we were going to end up. I just felt like we were getting towards the end of a movie. So I did peek at my watch just to confirm that, because I knew when it was due to end in the cinema. So, but I 100% agree with you. I was not bored. I was absolutely gripped the whole way through. And I was just having a fantastic time.
And I think that's the thing as well. You can know how the book plays out and you can know the story, but when you're watching this film, you still don't really know where Villeneuve's going to end it, do you? You don't know where the end point's going to be. You can kind of like guess, but he's splitting it into 2 parts. You know that going in now. It's like your first part of Fellowship of the Ring and things like that, those big epics where it takes time to get into certain things. But I think even then, there's so much that happens in this film. There's so many exciting set pieces and character development. Maybe the character development isn't as filled out as it could be. There's certain relationships that I think I have more of a connection to because I read the book that may not translate in the film, but I think they may all be developed as it goes on, and I pray to God it gets a sequel because it's just so good. You can't leave the rest of this story untold. I mean, come on.
Yeah, God, I'm nervous about that, I have to say. Like, I loved the film, and I really, really hope that Denis Villeneuve is allowed to make the concluding part of this story that he started to tell. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about the kind of the journey to the screen for this specific adaptation, but I mentioned it was shelved for a year, frustratingly. But I don't know, it's all got a bit muddied in my pandemic-addled brain, but I seem to remember that prior to release and prior to the pandemic, the sequel was a relative certainty, and there was talk of TV series to go along with it, with Villeneuve being, I don't know, executive producer or something like that. And then once it was shelved, there was some talk of like, definitely no sequel. We don't know if movies are going to exist in 12 months' time. We might be closing down the entire bloody studio. Don't ask me about a sequel. And now I don't know where we are. I don't know where we're at with it. But I think it's a lot more positive than that. But I know that it hasn't been formally greenlit at the time of recording.
That's so true, isn't it? Like the way that the landscape of cinema has changed in the past year or so is crazy, because like you say, this was set to be a massive, massive franchise, and it was pretty much a given that they were going to sort of invest more money into it. But then they started putting films straight to streaming, and they were thinking about getting rid of cinemas. And this is a film which should be seen at a cinema. Like, I want to go and see this at the IMAX because it is a film. It's a film which needs to be experienced like that, because like we keep saying, it's on a massive scale. You really get a sense of this world. And I don't think you can get that sense initially when you just watch it at home. You're not going to get that sense of awe. I mean, the soundtrack's amazing as well, isn't it? It's got lots of like, our mate Mike described it as wailing sounds as well, but it's all sort of like atmospheric. Everything is working towards building this picture of this world.
Yeah, some of that music contributes to the world building as well. That wailing, that kind of choral wailing. Wait, do you mean wailing like whales, or wailing like a person wailing?
Wailing like a person wailing.
Yeah. It's all kind of part of the kind of the culture of some of the people. I don't want to say too much here about that, but like it adds to the kind of world building. and it's very good. It's also very powerful music, which is very important for some of the stuff that happens in the second half of the film. And without saying too much, but Hans Zimmer's very good at doing that kind of rhythmic, pulsating music that really like helps make a scene very intense, and that really works to this film's favour.
Exactly. Everything is working to make this film the best that it can be. I mean, all of the cast are amazing as well. We talked a little bit about Timothée Chalamet, and his portrayal of Paul Atreides, I think, is spot on. That's kind of how I pictured Paul Atreides to be. I mean, the last depiction I saw of Paul Atreides was... So it's either, like, in my head, it's either Carl McLachlan or James McAvoy, and, you know, there's sort of, like, differences. But I think Paul Atreides is just... He is Timothée Chalamet. He's, like, kind of stoic and withdrawn, but he's got this great weight of responsibility on his shoulders and things that he can't control about what's going on in his life and what he's supposed to do. It's all sort of like Timothée Chalamet just does a really good job of bringing this character to the screen.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a great bit of casting, and it's a great performance from Timothée Chalamet. Paul is this highly educated, well-bred son of a duke, but at the same time, it's kind of it's all potential in Paul, and he's very young, inexperienced, and hasn't seen much of the universe, and you know that's what Timothée Chalamet is bringing to the role. I mentioned at the start that stuff happens to Paul, but that must be quite difficult to play, to make that a compelling character when you are primarily a reactive character. The story happens to Paul, and then to make a compelling performance from that and actually, you know, draw out the kind of emotional core of that character who is responding to a story of enormous magnitude happening to him. How would he feel about that? How would he respond to that? What does that do to his mind? And then how does he grab agency in that world and kind of push back? And Chalamet's bringing all of that to the screen incredibly well.
Yeah, and I think he's really assisted by the rest of the cast, which are supporting him as well in that role. Like his mother, played by Rebecca Ferguson, Lady Jessica, is great. She's got this real sense of, she knows the responsibilities that Paul's going to be having to sort of undergo, but she's still in control and things like that. And the characters of Gurney and Duncan Idaho, Jason Momoa and Josh Brolin, they are sort of like, they're helping to guide Paul, who played by Timothy. And all of this is so integral to the book when you're reading it, and they really have to like sort of develop those characters. I mean, I didn't see as much of Josh Brolin as I would have liked in the film. But I'm hoping that you'll see more of him as it goes on. Yeah,
and I was similarly, I was surprised to see as much of Oscar Isaac as we do. Again, like my memory of the book might not be perfect, but my memory of the Duke is that he is talked about a lot more than he talks. Like he looms large in Paul's life because he's Paul's father, but I feel like there aren't like a huge number of scenes with the Duke actually in the book, whereas Oscar Isaac is certainly, you know, one of the main characters of this film. But I've got absolutely no problem with that because I thought Oscar Isaac was great and did a really good job of bringing that character who looms large in Paul's consciousness in the book and bringing him to the screen with sympathy and with depth. You know, he is very, how would you describe him? He's very honourable, he's very likeable, but there's more to him than that. He's got edges, and he is interesting, but you can still see why the Atreides army kind of fall behind him and follow him and respect him.
There's so many great people in this film. There's Zendaya, who plays Chani. There's Stellan Skarsgård, who plays the Baron. Terrific character. I won't say too much about him, but you will enjoy watching him in the film. You've got Dave Bautista's in there, looking menacing. It's jam-packed full of great performances.
Bautista is so good in this. I loved him and Jason Momoa. I was probably feeling the most nervous about because I only know them from their comic book. Oh well, I know Momoa from Game of Thrones and he's very good in that, but you know, Batista he's very good in a kind of comedic straight man role in Guardians of the Galaxy, and to see him being like really, really genuinely menacing and scary in this film is brilliant. He's so fearsome and horrible and brilliant. Yeah, great performance from him.
He often talks about wanting to make the effort to pick roles which are actor roles, because I think he wants to kind of distance himself a bit. Well, not exactly distance himself, but obviously he's had a wrestling career. He's had that like entertainment figure persona, and he's always like, I want to do acting as well as I can possibly do it. So he goes for these big roles now. And yeah, just like you said, to see the contrasting performances, it's really interesting to see sort of how he's changing as an actor and how specific his roles are.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see the careers of wrestlers turned actors, because obviously they have, they spend an entire career acting, but people en masse don't think of them as actors when they're wrestling. And then oftentimes they're able to transition into acting and then act in a very interesting way that takes a lot of, I think, awareness of their physicality that is probably second nature to them from years of being a wrestler. But that's what he's doing in Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's what he's doing here. And he's doing it in two different ways. But he's using his physicality in, I don't know how to describe it, not an interesting way, but like in a very professional way, in an actorly way. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Which again harks back to Arnie. Like we talked about Arnie before. We talked about Arnie on the Not Just for Kids podcast. If you haven't heard that already, go and check that out. Russ, who produces and edits that, great guy. We had a lovely chat with him about Arnie and a couple of the films that he's been in. And yeah, like that kind of like that persona of being this tough guy, but you can also do comedy roles. I think that's really interesting. And yeah, it's in here in Dune in Batista's character.
And similarly, Jason Momoa, I think probably best known as Aquaman now rather than Khal Drogo, but still I'm sure holds a place in people's hearts as Khal Drogo. He's more in his Aquaman mode here. He's, I guess, as an actor, he seems quite comfortable as the swaggering, sexy, tough, heroic guy who will swoop into the rescue or jump out of the water in Aquaman or whatever, or in this case, draw his sword and go into battle. But hey, he does what he does and he's good at it.
And like you've got all of these characters in this sort of this desert planet, which is so foreboding and so alien to these characters which have come from a world which is like lush and green and there's water and all that kind of stuff. So they're deprived of all of these things. And on top of all of this, all of the political stuff that's going on, there's giant, massive sandworms just crawling around. Like that's something which I think you should watch out for in this film but they're really impressive. It's another great visualization that Villeneuve's done in this, and again, it's just so good.
Yeah, I mean, the sandworms are cool, but they've, to be honest, like they've never like been one of the things that I love about Dune. Like I love all of the politics and the relationships and all of that. But I will say that Denis Villeneuve has brought them to the screen looking absolutely incredible, and we talked about the scale of the movie and how things are just huge, and you do need that to show the sandworms in Dune. So he does a very good job with them.
And they're very difficult to depict as well, because it's a giant phallic symbol with a bum hole for a mouth. And I only sort of like think of it like this because I almost got you for your birthday a poster of one of the sandworms, and I was like, I can't get him that because if his girlfriend sees that on the wall, she is not going to be a fan. So yeah,
she likes the print you got me. So James didn't get me the bumhole poster. He got me a lovely depiction of someone walking across a dune, with the kind of cloak on that they wear. She likes that. She thinks it's cool. So yeah, I think you made a good shout there.
Phew, good job. I didn't go for the bumhole worm. But yeah, no, they are like depicted well in this. They're scary. They're good.
Well, I think that's about all we've got time for here. I still want to keep talking about Dune, but everything else I want to talk about is going to be a spoiler from here on out. So I think we need to wrap up this spoiler-free episode, James.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. So if you want to listen to the rest of our chat about Dune, you can find us on Patreon, and there you'll be able to hear the rest of our spoiler chat about this terrific film. We're fans, aren't we, Matt? We're fans of this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, two big thumbs up. 10 out of 10. Great movie. Yeah, absolutely loved it. If you're listening to this before you see the film, please go and see it. Consider seeing it more than once. I've heard that the box office is doing reasonably well, even though at the time of recording it's not out in the UK, and I don't think it's out in the US, but I'm not sure. But no one's paid me to say this. Please go and see the film. The only way that a sequel is going to get made is if this film does well at the box office. So go and see it. We didn't pay to see it as a press screening, but I'm opening my wallet. I'm going to be going to the IMAX at least once to see this film. Please go and see it.
Yeah, definitely. And in the meantime, if you want to come and chat to us about Dune, we are all over social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've got a website. You can find us at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pod. And we've also got a Facebook discussion group, haven't we, Matt?
Yep, come and join that and join the conversation. Come and have a chat about Dune. We will be bringing you Series 5 of Journey Through Sci-Fi very soon. If you're a new listener who's just tuning in because of this Dune episode, do check out our first 4 series. We did a series on AI, space, time travel, and most recently virtual reality. So if any of them take your fancy, do check them out.
Yes, and our next series on dystopia will be out before you know it. So that's it from us. We'll see you next time.